I forgot what we're doing.
That word.
I'm hoping that there was implementation.
Great.
Able to implement. So, okay, reasonable.
It's just this one sheet, so we probably have the least amount of research to dig through.
I knew there was a reason why I picked this.
Well, that's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
It gives us a little bit more, I think, to kind of digest, but we are supposed to define, get a general working definition for reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom setting.
Reasonable.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we have till about 2:45.
Okay.
Okay, so are we defining what reasonable is?
So, yeah, we need it.
Probably might want to start with that one.
Right, so I'm gonna say the two things.
I'm just
time and
gonna
money.
randomly write, if that's okay with
That's
everybody.
great.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Time and money.
Time and money, it has to be.
And then I have an app that will take anything handwritten and type it. Yeah.
Time.
What did you say about typing?
I have an app that'll take anything handwritten and type it.
Oh, what app is that? That is beautiful.
I think of actually asking them to do things that make sense for the training that we want them to have. When I think reasonable, you know. Yeah, because it needs to be aligned with what they need to be able to do, right?
Yeah.
We don't want them to have, and you know, the other half of this, of course, is a wide range of classrooms. I mean, you know, we talk about the example of having if we want them to be able to work with all types of students, do they have the placement that will enable that?
I would say accessibility,
Exactly.
right? Cause I
But
think,
that's part of reasonable to me, because I'm thinking, if I'm asking you to do something, I need to make sure you have the tools to do it.
I interpreted your comment a different way, although I do agree with that. That it begins not with the task, but with the data. And so instead of thinking about, well, I have to do small group instruction of X, Y, Z, so I can prove I can do that. Instead, it begins with what are students in front of me able to do? And what do the students authentically need? And then how am I improving upon student outcomes? And so I think that's a really tricky thing because so many people are into the performance of earning a credential because you need this or you need that task or you need this, right? Without like actually looking at the students that are in front of them who could very well authentically need whatever they need,
So-
right? And so beginning with student data before maybe even beginning with the levels of tasks that need to be performed. Does that make sense? I know that's like impossible because then it's
no.
like infinite
No,
doors
but
to open.
And then that's part of what I was saying, you're
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
to interpret it that way, because what I'm thinking, again, you know, at the heart of this, we do want teachers that need to be able to do what students in the K-12 world need, right?
Mhm.
And are we being reasonable with our expectations when we say, hey, you know, because are we even lined up with what kids need?
And I'm thinking of it in terms of like the process. Do teachers understand the process? Because I think, tell me if I'm synthesizing this correctly between what you two are saying, is that we need teachers to understand the process. It's not the product. It's not just the small teaching, but do new teachers or getting credentialed teachers understand the process of like, you look at data, then you make these decisions, you know, the process of going through that to make sense of their resources, to make sense of everything else, you know what I mean? Like there's a whole way of doing things, you know what I mean? The
And-
methodology or the process of teacher decisions being made.
And is that a reasonable expectation to have a beginning teacher? Is that reasonable?
Right.
And will they be in a classroom where they can do that?
Well, I think that goes to the implementation. So when I hear the methodology, when I hear the process, I hear implementation. Do they know that implementation science to do what they need to do? So other things I always tell people I have an assistive technology background and we always look at context. What's the context? What's the environment? What are we going, like you said, the task, what's the task? What task do we need to complete? And what tool do we need to complete that task? So for these teachers who are new, right, like just
Right.
learning this learning process, just learning the system, like how things, how things, that they gotta do this. So. Those are just. Hearing you guys talk.
I got a question. So our prompt, was it reasonable?
Should we ask Rebecca?
Oh.
Sorry, Rebecca.
Sorry.
By the way, you look great on screen.
Oh, yeah, it was fabulous.
You're muted.
Yeah.
There you. Oh, still muted?
Can you just like chat?
No, it's to change the settings.
Oh, it won't let her unmute because she's a participant.
Oh, that's why.
Hold up signs, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Hold up words on signs.
On the panel
We'll
though?
do them out loud.
She's on the panel.
Yeah,
She's on
okay,
our.
then she might be the panelist. Let me go get that. You guys continue to talk.
I was just thinking.
Rebecca, we're gonna try to get someone to change you to a panelist so you can
So
participate.
our full prompt, what was it?
So
Whole thing?
we're supposed to define reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings.
Cause she can't talk.
So we need to kind of, what is reasonable?
Rebecca, she's the-
What is implement?
Part of the panel.
What is a wide range of classroom settings? Right, that's kind of our.
We dissected.
Okay, and
But I
then
mean,
attribute
did-
one.
Do they intend for us to dissect it?
Well, they want us
Take
to
it at
come up
face
with a
value.
working, they want us to come up with a working definition. And then any sort of bullet points to help explain
Okay.
further.
For instance, at face value, it basically looking at implementation and looking at the availability of the proper placements for the candidates. I mean, you take the whole thing, but I'm saying if. I tend to dissect to say, you know, what's reasonable. I do think it's bigger than just saying this can be done in all the classrooms. I think it's much bigger and deeper than that.
Yes.
Well, so this piece of it, which is why I wanted to come into this room, is the part that I am actually not sure what the law is referring to. Is it referring to the fact that you can generalize it to a wide range? Or is it talking about accessibility? And so if you have to offer a wide range so that every candidate has access to something.
Right.
And I'm not sure what it means.
And
in
I
the
don't
law.
know, yeah, I don't know what the statement means, because like you say, it could be that, or again. Going deep into what's reasonable, is
Is she
it
talking?
reasonable?
Rebecca, are you able to speak
I
now
can.
and be heard?
Yay,
I should-
welcome, Rebecca.
Fix this.
It might just make me keep it unmuted. And if that's the case, I'm
Well,
so
we're
sorry.
unmuted
because
too,
it's
honey,
orange-
so we're good.
Yeah, you're fine, you're just like the rest of us.
It's not noisy, okay. There's just
No, not at all.
always gardening in Orange County, so
Oh, there, you sound great.
you hear a lawnmower.
We don't hear it.
We can't hear it at all.
Okay. Yeah, amen to everything you're saying. As we talked about,
Other parts.
what was reasonable or access in addition to time and money, exactly what you're saying, access to classrooms, access to students. And, it's unreasonable to give our candidates a task that would require a certain group of students, but not all of our candidates have access to those. So I want to be careful about that, understanding that candidates get placed in all kinds of schools. That's the thing that's been on my mind. Otherwise, I'm with you on everything. Thanks for including me.
You just bring up a really good question as to what the law actually intends for us to really answer. Because this could be really, we could go down the wrong rabbit hole, as it were.
Maybe diverse settings, like a wide range of settings.
That's what I'm thinking. I took it kind of at face value like that, but then again, when I dissect the word reasonable, I start to think about, is this a reasonable assessment for what K-12 kids need? So I'm like,
I need to find
And
it.
see, I kind of think about it from the candidate perspective. Is it reasonable to expect the candidate to be able to implement it?
yeah.
And do they have a reasonable access to, but I don't.
Well, I think a due diligence, like, when you have due diligence, like I tried my best with what I had. I may not have all the answers because I'm a beginning teacher, but I did do my due diligence and working with what I had.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, so I guess that would be reasonable, right? But then again, yeah, I might need to ask a question of a question.
Yeah,
Can I just go back to the very beginning? When we're talking about reasonable implementation,
yeah.
what are we specifically referring to? Like reasonable implementation?
That's
for-
what we'll ask.
No, I meant like for a new like
TPA, right?
for the TPA, right? As in passing the TPA, like as it pertains to taking the TPA. Like, is it reasonable and
And implement, yes.
implement
Yes.
what's asked on the TPA?
Reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings. Yeah,
I'm sorry, honey, what are you looking at?
this is the handout 3A for breakouts. And
3A.
so that's the phrase we're trying to define. What is reasonable to, what do we mean by implement? What do we mean a
Oh, I
wide range?
agree. Thank you.
Oh, are those questions are specific on there?
No.
Oh,
it's
you just
those
broke
are
down.
three parts of
Okay.
the.
But I like how Rebecca mentioned, like, so I'm a visual impairment specialist. You won't have a student who's blind in your class. You may teach your whole career and not even know that our discipline exists. But maybe you're expected to understand what it is, but you've never really had a student. So I really like how Rebecca mentioned that, like, are they expected to teach to a population they never even really thought about? Because I mean, teachers I know, like, I've been teaching 20 years, I didn't even know, blind children, I didn't even know, right? Like, blind children are educated, right? Hello.
And so is that a reasonable expectation?
Exactly.
So the way that it's written in the law,
Okay.
putting all four focus concepts together, right? It says an analysis of any modifications needed to the current assessment to ensure that they are valid and authentic to the work of teaching, reasonable to implement in the wide range of classroom settings across the state, and appropriate for beginning teachers. So I think that what this is talking about
The implementation.
is the actual assessment.
Right.
That is the current assessment reasonable to implement
In a wide range.
in a wide range? So I think what it's saying is acknowledgement that there's a wide range of classroom settings.
Mhm.
And can the TPA be implemented in any one of those and have someone have a positive outcome from it? So if they have no access to English learners,
Mhm.
can they still pass the TPA?
Right.
If they don't have any special education students in their population, does that matter? What if they only have access to 6 kids?
Mhm.
What if they're in a farm school that only has 2 kinders and they're doing a PK3?
Or you're a charter
Does
school,
that
all
work?
you do is online services.
Yeah, that.
Yes, so I think that's what this is getting to is
So,
Yeah.
just the pure implementation, not
of
necessarily.
the assessment itself. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
So the process, like you were talking
Yeah.
about, what's the process?
and so if we go back to 4432.0.2, so the one we just received, the givens.
Yes.
So some of the candidate rights would be, that it should be aligned to state standards and in terms of implementation. It should be aligned to state standards.
There's a, right here, 3.2, so that's.
So-
she's talking about.
I think that when we think about implementing, because that allows every kind of does that make sense? So there's like state standards for almost every single content area set, although some are missing. But even then, okay, there's a missing content area, I don't use it. So that makes sense. Like world languages, I know there's
Right.
great. But then for C, it says a reasonable number of assessments, which again, looks super big. And it has to happen during the normal term of the preparation program. So I think that reasonable would also mean that it's built into a program and not additional work outside of the program, which is interesting to think about,
Well, that's what the law has always said.
right?
And it's- If anybody started looking through 6A, it's not happening.
No,
Right.
it's not.
I mean, there's 1,600 teachers currently not in a program who haven't passed from just this past year
Yeah,
alone.
crazy.
Okay, so
So that's like just
built
already
into the
built
program, but
into
you also mentioned
the-
number of assessments, right?
Yeah, it's a reasonable number of assessments, which I think our concept is reasonable numbers of things might vary.
Well, it goes back to time, right? Like what's reasonable time?
Yeah.
And if, so I think we're just tying back to the number of assessments to time, like, is it reasonable to, expect a candidate to do this many assessments in a 2-year program, in a 6-month program, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Or like when the window opens, like the TPA you have, you know what I mean? Actually,
Well, not to mention that a program is gonna have other assessments too,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
right,
And so the question is this more valuable than the other formative pieces that are supposed to be?
Well, supposedly they're all connected, right? Or sort of, kind of.
should
The
be.
assessments, I mean,
They're
supposedly.
supposed to be. That was not my experience in the time that I worked.
Mhm.
And that would come up through the accreditation process for the universities, where it would be evaluated.
Exactly.
The assessments you have in your syllabus, is it too burdensome in addition to what's required by CTC? Is
Yeah.
that one of them?
Yeah.
here's my other concern that I have whenever we're breaking out into this and talking about the TPA. We can't talk about the TPA without talking about the credentialing experience. You know what I mean? That leads up to the TPA. And I, like, even in the last group we were in last month, everything that we talked about kept going back to, well, what is the credentialing program doing? Like, you know what I mean? But we're not, as a working group in charge of credentialing program, we're looking at the TPA in isolation. Am I thinking about this correctly?
But I don't think we are because the charge expands to accreditation and not just the TPA component, but accreditation in general.
Okay.
So if we're in charge of looking at that and investigating that, then I would argue that we're actually looking at the entirety of the process, not just.
Okay, well, then that's good to know because I feel like a lot of, I don't want to say issues or concerns, or the things that we've brought up about the TPA goes back to the credentialing. I mean, like this, like you just mentioned, the passing rate, all these teachers not passing. Well, they're also all in credentialing programs. What's going on?
Except these 1,000 people, right? You said there's over 1,000 people who are not in any kind of teacher credential program.
Well, they were,
Okay, they just didn't.
But they didn't pass.
well, they passed their program,
But they didn't
Yeah.
pass the TPA.
They can't get recommended.
so now they can.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
Right,
No, that's okay. No, and that's problematic.
right.
I mean, that, to me,
And if
that goes with that connection, is it reasonable? So
Right.
is that reasonable?
Is that reasonable
is
that
not
they have passed? No, I think
It's
it's.
not reasonable that you get to pass a program and then you didn't pass the TPA. Something is wrong. There's a disconnect here.
Especially if you look at their GPA, I'm like, you've gotten straight A's up until this point, you know what I mean? And you can't pass that, you know what I mean? And you're,
Well, there it is.
Well,
I
I like
mean,
how the background too, those teachers, what kind of are they teachers of color? Are they from more rural area?
What school are they at?
Exactly what supports
Yeah.
in the community do they have?
now, I guess,
And what do they do now?
Yeah, exactly.
they're substitute teaching.
now is this, so when we get into that, because we're just talking, because as you defined it, we're talking about the implementation for this particular piece. Because when we get into this part, I think that's the one of the other prompts. That might be one of the other,
Validity,
and the other one,
formative, and the other one is defining what a beginning teacher is.
that part. That
Which that part is tricky.
That part,
Yeah.
that part
Because
right there.
we're testing them before they're a beginning teacher.
Exactly. That part.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's reasonable. But that's ours.
See,
Yeah.
but and when we talk about the implementation, so I guess, even though we're talking about strictly just the implementation and the process, I do feel as if we can't really ignore that the process is supposed to help credential a person
Yeah,
in the
right.
program. So it has to be connected somehow.
Where is the language in the statute? Sorry, reasonable to implement. Where's that language?
So it's
Which part of that? I'm just having trouble putting my finger.
from SB.
I
1263.
live in the ed code, and I can't find it, so.
So it's 44320.4C1. And it's in
3204 what?
44320.4C1. And it's the part about what our purpose is here as a work group.
There it is.
And it's talking about, it's an analysis of any modifications, right? And part of it is reasonable to implement in the wide range of classrooms.
Okay, great.
I was-
Yeah, underline please for me, honey.
reasonable
So modifications.
definition of classroom setting context is TPA flexible enough to capture the different contexts and settings.
Mhm.
So those, they actually gave us some little specific,
Mhm.
bullet notes in the
Mhm.
thing.
Which one, where are you?
I'm on the handout.
Had really good notes.
All right, I'm on
Oh.
the handout, the focus area. How many papers that?
Great,
And it's below, where are we at?
it's on the back page,
Yeah.
under the
it's
box.
The second page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Section 3, group discussion notes. So I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, definition of classroom setting, which is interesting.
And I think that comes back to the previous points about like the wide range of classroom settings and the the incredibly diverse population of students and school types we have in California. And leaving it, this is scary to say, open-ended enough that you could have the I school, the E school, the schools that are specifically created for special populations and have all of those students have teachers who can be accredited, or they could have student teachers at any of those schools. Are we saying that they can start anywhere?
I think we have to.
Yeah, you have to. And so I think definition of classroom setting is an accredited K through or pre-K.
Yeah,
through
absolutely. I think-
and 12.
I think you're right in
Right.
terms, that's pretty,
Yeah.
pretty explicit in terms of that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
I think that one's an easy one, as it were, because it does have to be, classroom setting it should be the legal definition of a classroom setting for a public school teacher.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Not over private,
Well,
No, but private school teachers don't even need to have credentials.
but some of them do pursue credentials.
They do, but I'm just saying that they don't have to though, because I know teachers who teach in like Catholic schools.
that's true.
It's
You
true.
know what I mean?
Like
No,
at SC,
Candidates can do,
concur
candidates can do
yeah.
clinical practice in a private school. As long as they have the same curriculum,
Yeah.
so generally the curriculum has to be aligned to the K-12 academic content standards. And they have the diversity that reflects California, so they can't be
That right there, that part.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I guess that's the key,
Mhm.
those two things.
and that's up to
So
them.
any accredited PK-12 classroom that utilizes
Content standards.
The curriculum is aligned to the contents, the California content standards. And the population reflects the diversity of California.
Oh,
That's what's in the current standards.
but that's only for private schools, the population.
That's
have
only
to
for,
reflect
that's only
California.
for private.
Because
Right.
you could teach at a not diverse school.
That's right.
fine,
Yeah, you
or
could.
Public, and you can
Right.
get your credential.
True. So I guess maybe it's like, say,
Like
a K-12
yeah, yeah.
public school, or
a
if private,
school.
those two
There you go.
bullets.
Yeah.
Oh, we solved one, let's go.
Yeah, look at us. Group 3, we see you and we got you.
Rebecca, do you have anything to share?
I'm just wondering if there's somebody, I don't think this would happen. But I'm thinking through what someone could say, oh, I'm stuck because I'm in this situation, like.
Mhm.
Does our definition of classroom setting include online classes, like online schools that maybe don't do whole group because they're, flexible or whatever? Is that a classroom? Or do we want them to be prepared to physically be in classrooms with students? In order to get a credential, you have to be able to do that. If a student is able to get an assignment where they're doing home hospital instruction, is that a place where they could do a TPA? I think that would never happen, but if it did happen, I just think do we have an answer to that?
I think that for something like that, that would start to be covered under the special education services and the specials, the support needs for a student. I think that would go under those credential requirements. And then, of course, the setting would be appropriate for that student and, of course, the candidate who is teaching that student. Because that would start to be covered under those
Mhm.
standards, right?
Well, and the TPAs, correct me if I'm wrong, I took the ed TPAs, so that one's national, not California specific. And I want to say that there was a section on if you taught online, like they stated it, like if you're a classroom, your classroom should look like this. If you're online, it looks like this. I want to say it did say that because I remember glossing out like, oh, that's not me. Next section, you know what I mean? When you're going through the directions, because I had to read the directions very carefully. So I think the TPA as it stands does address online teaching.
Was that
Awesome thing.
post-COVID or pre-COVID?
I just took it last year, 2023.
Post. I wonder if it's still
I don't know.
true.
Right, so we can put that as a question mark, like, does the TPA currently address online teaching? But then that raises the question of like, what, I don't know, this is what, I might be misinterpreting what you guys are saying, but for me, when it comes to getting your credentials as a teacher, you need a credential, like, I feel like it should be I don't want to call it generic, but a good starting point credential, but teaching like in a hospital, teaching like this, or teaching, those are very specific, like advanced teaching. I want to say advanced, but it's a very specialized. How's that specialized? But I think when you're getting your California teaching credential, you're at level 1, like you shouldn't be in a specialized setting already, and you should be able to teach in a general like vicinity before you become specialized. I don't know, am I thinking of this
That's
correctly?
ideal, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. I would
I know from my,
yeah, from my own personal
discipline,
experience.
yeah.
Okay.
And so going back to classroom, like for my discipline, I see brand new teachers coming in with no background in child development.
Yeah.
No, like I used to work here and now I want to be a visual impairment. And we work one-on-one with our students. We teach specialized skills for visual impairment. So I think about this, like, do they have a background in teaching a whole classroom management skills, how the school year goes? No, because ours very different. Our role is very different. We're itinerant. We travel from school to school. We pull our students. We see our students one-on-one. Very little do they have, and I only have classroom experience because I taught before, but not everyone I know teaches.
Right,
Yeah.
and again, I think that goes to, a special ed credential, because the beginning special ed teacher is gonna have some of those experiences that, are specialized.
Maybe you have some sub experience, maybe that's where you get some classroom experience, but that's
Yeah, when you get, although like just for mine,
We're gonna try.
I started off in a very tough, tough situation in terms of the students that they had extensive support needs. We're talking feeding tubes, we're talking trachs, and that was my first experience as a sub. So,
Wow.
so I'm just saying that, those kinds of things, they do happen, but again, I think if you were a special ed candidate, that would be more in your wheelhouse. I don't
or
think
you're
that's
exposed to it more, I would
right,
say.
exactly.
And sometimes you don't.
Sometimes you don't get that,
Yeah, you're like,
sometimes-
oh, I'm a sub, I'm showing up, you don't know what you're showing up to.
That's
and you're
absolutely
like,
correct.
Oh, gosh, like,
But we
what,
go back to reasonable, like it's not reasonable for a new teacher to be in a setting where you have to
But
work,
it's-
you know what I mean, with tracheas and feeding
If it's
tubes.
an extensive support needs teacher, then yes,
excuse me,
bless you. If
Right.
it's an extensive support needs candidate, then absolutely.
but I think that goes back to what you mentioned earlier about participants have access to a wide range
Right.
of classroom settings.
Exactly.
Do they know what extensive support needs classroom looks like? Do they know what visual impairment looks? Do they know what a kindergarten TK classroom looks like compared to all the other high
And
school?
so that would be like, with the general ed, the general ed curriculum, like when we made that common trunk, right? And then we started to show these different things so that they would have experience. But I think you're right in terms of it's not reasonable for a general ed teacher to necessarily be in an extensive support needs situation.
Without any exposure before.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you are all bringing up a really good point that might go under implementation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that even if it's aligned to student content standards, it needs to be guided by a mentor with practical experience in that area, right? Which I don't necessarily know is always happening.
Well,
Does that make sense? Cause like sometimes you just don't have a
Well,
person.
for yourself,
who's-
though.
Right?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
right?
but then
And
that goes.
so, and like if you're an intern,
Oh, yeah,
like
that
you're
part.
in the classroom because we do
That part.
intern programs,
Mhm.
right? And so in a perfect world, because we do have a little bit of control, because it says on the givens, right, that there needs to be it needs to be embedded in a program, even interns. And so it needs to be guided by a mentor with experience in that setting with that particular population or that particular like neighborhood or that particular, right? Like,
Well, that's part of the preconditions, is that when you talk
Right.
about your field work, it has to be,
Yeah,
you have to
it
be
needs to
mentored by
be-
somebody who is,
Right.
has the same credential that you're
Right.
seeking, right?
and so I think that because I did mine a
No.
long time ago, it was different, it had a different name.
Thanks.
Right, okay, and so, I'm thinking that if there isn't a sense that like of that this was a person on their own on an island, something didn't go right, right? This is not the person. And I get, it's hard to say, well, you shouldn't be assessed because they did all this work and they need to be assessed and they need to move forward in their career. But like clearly implementation in its ideal state would be a
Ideal.
person mentoring there with them,
Well,
right?
it's supposed to be. I mean, that's part of the process.
Right.
It's supposed to be
It's
to
supposed to
them,
be,
right?
yeah.
It's supposed to be the person at the site plus
Plus
the person
another
from your program.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And, you know, combining both.
And that's supposed to be, I mean, that goes into the accreditation, because you have to answer those questions and show how you're actually doing that and supporting the candidate on both sides.
Right,
So,
so I would write that as like well, for us, I think a comment or a concern with accreditation and making sure that the candidate themselves are in an appropriate setting, because I remember getting my credential way back when. I think I have history. We went through the same program. But anyways, I was in a mod severe setting because I taught students back then. It was called MR, mental retardation. It's now called ID. But I was getting a mild to moderate credential. I remember my credential, I went to Loyola Marymount and that my professor pulled me out and said, we need, thankfully I switched settings just because I got bumped. But she was like, oh, I'm so glad you moved because we were about to pull you. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, because you need to be in a mild moderate setting. You're in a mod severe setting, even though I could technically kind of spin it because you do have some mild students in your mod severe setting. But you are technically in a mod severe setting and you need to be in mild moderate because your credentials mild moderate. And I'm very fortunate that LMU took it very seriously that was my setting and that my mentor matched that. But I can tell you, working for the district intern program, that is, yeah, they're just happy a warm body's there. They're like, we'll make it work. And they're happy to have mentors. So like, you have a special ed credential? Well, that's okay. We need you to take some gen ed teachers under your wing. I'm like, okay.
Well, and I just wonder about just like going back to, I wrote accountability. So looking, I guess, for the program, looking at accountability. So I'm sorry, these 1,000 teachers are on my mind. I just can't get out of my head. Like 1,600, yeah, or 1,600, right? So, like, what is that accountability from that credentialing agency? Like the responsibility for that person who did not pass, like, I don't know. Anyway, that's just something I just keep on.
So they get to the end, I just have to say that, they get to the end of their program. So when you're talking about reasonable, I'm wondering about, you get to the end of the program and you can't pass, you're done. So you either have to re-enroll, but this is where it's the implementation of reasonable that I think.
Yeah.
How do you deal with those candidates that don't finish? Because they're
But
not
it
done,
passed the
they're not
program.
done. No, they haven't passed the program because they
No.
can't be recommended for the credential.
well,
They may have passed
what
their
happened.
courses.
They
but-
passed the coursework, right? But they
Yeah,
didn't, but they're not in
They're
the.
not considered completers. They're not considered completers in our view.
I
Right.
can tell you what happens.
Well, but.
No, I know what happens. I'm just saying.
No,
they're
I'm
screwed.
They are screwed and they have
And
to
they're
be.
paying for that
Yes, that one
program
unit
already.
class.
Yeah.
That continues them as students.
Right.
So,
But that's not being
financially, they're on the-
universally done in all programs.
right, so in certain programs, you pay that one unit class to continue being a student so that you can quote, continue to get support until you pass the TPAs. But that one unit course could look very expensive. If you're part of like a district intern program, I will tell you, they give you maybe a few months of grace. Because then remember, your intern credential
yeah,
expires.
exactly.
And then your,
And then you get.
That's exactly right. That's why I brought it up.
Right.
The reasonableness
Yeah.
comes when you can't pass it. Really,
Right.
I mean, really.
Yeah.
But then again, is it
And
reasonable?
what's reasonable?
I guess I'm gonna put that out in a second.
right,
But is it reasonable to expect that every single person can become a teacher just because you've gone through a program? Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean,
I would argue if you get to the end of the program
My answer is yes to that, because you had
Yes.
2 years or a year.
Someone should have sent you out of the
Like,
program
you've
before you
gone
got
through
to the
this
end.
program. Yeah, you've gone through this program. Let's just say 2 years for the sake of simplicity, but you've gone through, you've taken all these courses, because there's a minimum number of courses you have to pass, including field work. And if everyone along the way these are credentialed or accredited programs with accredited credentialed instructors and mentors, and everyone has said yes along the way, after 2 years, yes, you should get your credential. But somewhere along the line, someone should have said, nope, you didn't pass this course, or you didn't perform well enough, or your field work doesn't look pretty. Like, you have 2 years to get to that point.
I know. So again, this is the formative part.
Right.
Because what's going on in the program in terms of this, because right now it's a high stakes assessment at the end.
Right. It's
Which is
summative.
problematic. That's
It's not.
problematic. No, it's not.
It's summative.
So
Yeah.
then again, you could get good grades in your coursework. You could, because again, if you have a coaching model in the program where they're like, we're going to coach this person until it does look good, kind of thing. But then again, what's reasonable on that assessment, because a lot of this is, writing, and a lot of this can be somewhat subjective in terms of whoever's reading it. So if you're being judged on your writing ability,
That's not your teaching ability.
that's not your teaching ability. So is that, I'm just playing.
We're just gonna set things on fire. Let's do this.
I love it.
I didn't mean to.
Is reasonable no more than 50% through a specific program?
Well, there you go.
Is
I don't
reasonable weighted more heavily on practice than written submissions?
I don't know.
And so is it more reasonable to say that this assessment occurs no more than 50% of the way through any given program?
And that to me would be, see, that's the formative part.
And then it would be formative.
And that makes sense
And then
because,
they'll make it a unit, and then they say, that's my rule. I made that rule.
Wait,
No,
no,
but-
sorry, repeat what you said. So you're saying the
So-
TPA should happen halfway
It
through?
should happen
No
earlier.
more than 58% of the way through the program.
Right, so that
Or-
you didn't pass, then you already have that shining light, yellow light that says,
Yeah.
we think your career.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would argue that if we do something like that, then the current state of the TPA is not reasonable
right,
It's
for someone who's halfway through a program.
no,
No,
that's
they're gonna
true.
have to fix it.
And the other
Yeah.
thing, 'cause I think we brought
I
this up
think
last
people have
time,
already
didn't
been
we?
whispering that it's unreasonable.
Well, I
Yeah,
think so
okay,
too.
Okay.
The other thing is what, instead of it being so high stakes, we need to rethink this trajectory of training a teacher. Maybe this TPA should be something that happens. I mean, I'm just,
Or
in
parts
terms
of it, so that it does
Right.
happen
So
like
it's-
at 1 year mark and then
Right,
whatever.
exactly.
Because right now it is, no matter what they say, it's summative. It's a very end, it's high stakes.
Yep.
And you don't get to resubmit.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like you can fail one part of it and the whole thing is gone. Like if they invalidate one section of it, you can score low in one section as long as the overall passes.
Mhm.
But if they invalidate one section, like you didn't, in the fifth here, but if you didn't read the directions carefully and you submitted, let's just say, not the student's work sample and you submitted something else instead, or whatever, those little bits and pieces, you could get your score invalidated. And that one section, the whole thing is thrown out and they tell you you can't resubmit everything, even if it's just that one small section. So it's very, very high stakes at
Yeah,
that point.
it is.
I think there needs to be a tension between, I want the most qualified person in front of my child.
Mhm.
Yes.
And I want someone who is capable in front of my child who is in a public school in California, balanced with, like, there's a place to assess in the program and still have room for growth and induction. Does that make sense? Like, I think there should be a program assessment. I don't know that it all should be pushed into induction because I've worked with the kids in the high turnover schools where all the teachers are first year teachers.
Mhm.
And that is the worst case scenario.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right, and it's, I mean,
No, I know we.
yeah,
No,
I
no,
just, I
know.
think that there should be an assessment that's built.
Well,
But I think there are also, like, I think you're right, that there should also be something else in induction that helps tune.
can we make that suggestion on our thing though, to say that, I feel like we're dipping into the formative.
4 minutes to come up with a definition.
A definition of what word?
I think Rebecca's got it. I think Rebecca's been hearing us.
Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, Rebecca.
Oh, get on.
And Rebecca's ready to present for us, right?
Yeah, no, we can't do that
Bye,
because the
Rebecca.
tech hasn't been like great, so we don't want to risk it. I can't get the connection, no. Can't do that.
And we asked for 5 more minutes just to synthesize our definition.
No, I mean. Reasonable would be, I mean, it needs to be, I mean, if we take this in its broadest sense, then the other focus areas are part of this. In terms of being reasonable, because it has to be formative, that is obvious. It absolutely has to be formative, and it is not, and that's why it's unreasonable.
Right. And what's the current passing rate for TPAs or any of those tests?
Depends on the school.
Yeah.
No, but
Fast
overall.
have I think 100 or 99%.
We have a bunch of,
Well, okay, but let's just take
today.
it down.
Yeah.
Okay, fast, well, like the TPAs, if we break it down by just.
Which we've got, yeah.
We've got, so what is the passing? Because if it's over 70%, I would say that's pretty reasonable currently right now. If 70% of people who are taking this assessment are passing it. But if the rate is lower than 50, then we.
Depends what place you're talking about. Some places are below, most are higher, but not all.
There are certain subject areas that people pass more, like ed specialists, do those pass more or higher, more than others? But
I know world languages always comes out pretty low. There's a couple of specific spots that do. Multiple subject. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that data in here?
Okay.
the data is in one of the handouts. The internet's not working.
6A at the end.
6A.
Okay, so going back to what it originally said,
We have to make a
Is
definition
working definition.
with bullet points for each of these posters, basically.
We're supposed to kind of combine it all.
Yeah.
So we got the
So-
wide range part, we got that part.
Okay.
We got that one good. I think the reasonable one, I do think as much as we have talked about, how it needs to be formative, I think we need to just go ahead and straight up say that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It literally has to be formative, meaning multiple, not high stakes at the end of the program. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The new time is 3:00.
Oh, thank you.
It's inclusive of a break.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, I'm having a working break here.
Reasonable, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. Reasonable.
So embedded in the program is already part of the understanding, right? So what
No.
we're suggesting is,
Not in
what's
this
not?
section.
I thought it
If
was.
we say it's formative, it should be implied.
It's
Well, I mean,
implied.
that's our suggestion, right?
Yeah.
Well, currently, I think when it says embedded in the program, it's prepping for the TPA is embedded in the
Well,
program.
that part is,
Yeah,
yeah.
you know what I mean? But the actual passing of the TPA itself is at the very end. It's a test or a portfolio that is submitted one time, poof.
I would argue that's the current practice.
Yeah,
I would
that's the
argue
current-
that's
that's what I'm
not what the
saying. That's
current
not what
law
we need.
says,
That's
right.
Yeah, exactly.
right?
What the current, what is, sorry, Mandy, say that
Current
again?
law, and I would say
Okay.
that's what the current practice is, but that's not. the law.
that we just signed,
Right.
yeah.
Because I think that's our clear recommendation. The clearest thing that's come out is in order to be reasonable, it needs to be broken down and embedded in the program along the way rather than being a large test at the end, which
Or-
then
or-
obviously
Yes.
for a formative thing. But I think just explicitly what we mean by embedded is breaking it down, what has come out here, so that it's touch points along that 2-year path.
Yeah, because I do think you're right, is that it's really important for the program to be able to know if a candidate is on the right path or not before they get to
the end, when it's
I
too late.
really think that's important. And that's currently not built in.
No.
I mean, we ask questions about how many students were canceled out,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't really look at, well, we ask about remediation if somebody's not doing something, but it's not really to the extent of when we talk about assessing for, this to get your credential, we don't dig that deep, and we should.
And I just keep trying to think of, but then what would be reasonable
Well, there you go.
for someone who's had 2 classes in child development? What's reasonable at that point?
And I guess, because that's the other issue, because again, with the wide range of settings out there in schools and, communities, how reasonable is it to assume that, at say 5 months in or 10 months in, what is it? Is it the same for everybody?
No, of course not.
Right.
But there's definitely
I mean, there should be some
formative
kind of something.
skills.
Right.
There's things like
Well, lesson
understanding
planning.
your student
that
population,
part.
right?
Oh, yeah.
There's
Those
collecting
things.
data, there's lesson planning based on data, right? I think,
But I would also argue though, the collection of data and the reasonableness, given how, people can't really collect as much data on K through 12 students as we really need.
Well, that's what data's available. I see a
Yeah.
lot of numbers that don't mean nothing.
You're absolutely right.
There's that.
I'm really advocating for more qualitative data. It takes time. Qualitative data takes time.
Takes time.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
why
that
quantity's
part.
here, but it's.
Yeah, and is that reasonable?
Well, I would argue
And
the
should that be
job
the
of a
only
teacher is
measure?
actually not
Not reasonable,
reasonable.
hello. That part
Well, I
right
just
there.
keep thinking of formative as far as the TPA is concerned, that maybe the assessment does need to be given earlier, not 2 months into the program, but we talk about like if it's a 2-year program, the 1-year mark. And maybe it is something that they need to submit in either in parts, or you give them an opportunity to resubmit.
Well, I think just classroom. So what do you do in your, so I did my multiple subjects, my first teaching credential. So you do a reading class. So do a portfolio portion of it on a reading assessment you've done with the class or with the student in my discipline of student who reads Braille. You have a math class. So how does that look? You have a PE class, physical ed. Okay, how do I take data in that? Because you're multiple subjects, so you teach everything, right? So I don't understand. And again, I'm not familiar with the TPA process, but I've done national board. And so we do ours in 4 components. We have a just general knowledge. What do you know about your discipline? You take a multiple choice test. You do differentiation. You do professional development. And then you do, oh gosh, there's another one in there. But they're all about different things. And then at the end, you can retake the test if you need to. You can redo it, and you get to choose. You have the autonomy based on your setting, based on where you're at, to do what you need to do to help elevate that teaching practice. So I don't know, and I don't know what the TPAs look like now. So how can we help, like you said, embed a little bit at a time, and then you come at the end with the little, it's like when you do your dissertation, right? You do chapter 1, 2, you do them in little portions. You don't just
Right.
write a
Not
big
the
giant
end, we're
paper.
done, yeah.
Right.
But I would argue that there's no point for someone who can't pass section 1 to even bother to go to 2.
Right. So how do you?
I don't want someone going through and paying all this money
Right.
if they are never meant to get past step 1.
But if you're hard up for teachers and you take anybody.
We are.
Yeah,
That
then
part.
that's what happens.
If they take this, like if the program expects them to start looking at the TPA year 2, starting after year 1, when you take the intro, whatever to teaching, but starting year 2, that's when you really look at the TPA and you're implementing from your classes to put into the TPA. I think that is fair at that point, that if you're taking a reading class and you're not passing the TPA for it, like that's a conversation. That's the university looking like, okay, that's one class and one TPA, section of the TPA you
Or
did
why
pass.
did you pass it?
Why
Because
didn't
maybe
you
they
pass?
have the knowledge, maybe their brain.
Right, and that's the opportunity for the credentialing program to look at this candidate and be like, we need to prep you some more. You're not ready if you can't pass that one section. And then same thing with if the math section, if the scores aren't passing. And even on the TPA, it's embedded within math, and because you do a whole portfolio for math and you do a whole portfolio for ELA, but special needs and EL students are embedded within those 2.
Yeah.
Like, how do you teach EL students in that math class? How do you teach EL in that? So, but when you're
It's hard.
right, but when
Go
you're
back to
taking
this
EL,
wide range of settings.
right,
Right.
but when
Have
you're
access to
taking
that.
a course on EL, most credentialing programs have a whole course on EL, isn't it? A class, sorry.
Yeah, well,
Of some sort.
because everybody has to be clad now.
Right, so the CLAD course, then that's an opportunity for the TPA to address that in a separate little portfolio, of EL students. What do you know what I mean? And if someone is in a classroom that doesn't have EL students, again, because it's formative, because we're giving different opportunities, it's not just one lesson where you have to have all these different ingredients. you can maybe have the opportunity to pull an EL student from someone else's class and demonstrate that you understand what to do with a student. But how do teachers?
That's a great, because that's what happens in national board. If you don't have a classroom, then you can borrow a classroom.
Right,
But part of it too, though, is you have to build a relationship with the student population and you have to know your students. And so that's another like
right.
thing.
I think a weird logistical question. How reasonable is it to assess all these moving parts throughout a school year if people are submitting them in chunks? Because
Well,
let's
their
be honest,
populations will continue to
you-
change, right?
you collect the portfolios, cause then you do portfolio scoring, and then we let the scores out, and then we're done. Right, like how reasonable is it for the scoring bodies?
I think it's very reasonable because like you said, it's being done for national board right now.
But
And
they
every,
still submit
Well,
in
you,
May.
they
Like
do.
you still
so-
submit in May. You submit 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, but you submit in May.
Mhm.
And so.
But you might have a different class every year or a different group of students, so you just write about, and I kind of
Yeah,
like that
so-
variation, because now you're thinking about, okay, last year's group of students was way over here, and this group of students way over here, and they're gonna have different needs.
So you
But-
might have a partially
that
credentialed
is
teacher in
for-
a classroom.
But
Yeah.
the national board is intended for
Yeah.
well into your
Yeah,
career,
career
not the beginning.
I understand that,
Right.
but I've just.
I mean,
how
it's
that
well
process
laid
is.
out, but it's
Yeah.
definitely
Okay.
beyond
I know,
a
can
I tell
what I would call
Cost
reasonable.
prohibitive
You're gonna laugh.
for students
I'm-
and for the
yeah.
leaders.
I'm the teacher that everyone was making fun of, like, Linda, you can pass national board and you can't pass the TPA. Okay, I'm not even joking with
That's
you.
crazy.
And I did,
Writing's a huge piece, like, it goes back to the
That-
writing,
that's a
what is
huge-
the writing expectation, are you talking about academic writing, or are you just talking about telling me what do you know?
Or scripting, what's happening, right?
Especially for
So-
teachers who are second English language learners. I'm used to second language learner, I'm still, my brain's still wrapping around that.
Yeah.
So the dictionary definition of reasonable is fair and sensible.
Fair and sensible.
Mhm.
I think fair actually applies here. I'm not sure, well, sensible, I would argue does too.
What's
I
sensible?
feel like that needs to be attribute 1. Fair means happens to during the program, that has a purpose within classrooms, that
All these things that we
Yeah.
talked about.
focuses on the process.
Yeah, formative.
informative and
Yeah.
opportunity to, very big on opportunity to resubmit.
Yes.
Because I think that's huge. Like
Well,
the
and it's
fact,
understanding what did you miss.
Yeah.
Like, I did not pass one of my components the first time and I cried, and that's okay, because I finally understood, and it was on formative, and because we didn't learn that. What formative and summative is to know.
but did the
language
feedback
to-
tell you that though?
Well, no, the feedback for national board is not that great, but.
No, but the
talking
same thing with the
others.
TPAs, I will tell you.
TPA.
The feedback for TPA
You
is
need
even more
information and
vague,
this and this, okay, thank you.
right? So I think. the
Okay,
feedback
so
on-
if we come up with our definition here,
Mhm.
should we write fair?
So are we working on the general working
Yes.
definition?
I think they're going to question what fair is.
Yeah.
I know.
It's just
So-
more
It's a-
ambiguity.
How do we define this?
Reasonable.
I got all the little bullets, but I have zero idea how to do this.
If we use formative, then we're just taking it to the formative. which I-
But you need-
No, but it's true though.
It's true. I think it's true.
I think I think that being reasonable for
It's
in
formative.
implementation, it needs to truly be formative. I don't think that that's kicking it down I think that's part of our.
But I think that's a
definition.
bullet point down
Yeah.
here. I don't think that's our our working definition.
It's part of it though. It's a
think
very
so?
I
important
think
part of our
so.
definition.
Okay, so
So,
It truly needs to be formative because otherwise it's not reasonable.
because I think it was such a key point that just kept coming up on the green one.
Right.
So if we put formative and then we bullet point formative, like we talked about multiple opportunities. Talked about time, like breaking up the assessment into chunks.
And I think program embedded, I think, is language that exists that also,
But program embedded to actually do the TPA, not just to
Yeah.
prep for the TPA.
do you need space here?
no,
You got it?
1.5 minutes.
No.
She's gonna chat it to us right
are
now.
other people really ready?
No,
they're probably
No,
just
they're
as
not. They're
excited as we
just as.
Okay,
Okay, what do you have, reasonable to implement?
well, this is what it currently says.
Yeah.
So now we need a working definition and then a whole lot of bullet
Do
points.
you okay, so if we had I almost want to say start with your bullet points and then work
Do
your
the
way up.
working
Yeah,
definition, do it backwards.
yeah, I would say get your bullets first.
Mhm.
So I would say truly formative.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you, yeah, so,
Cause that could be one.
yeah,
It's formative.
it has to be.
Generations, third generation.
Embedded.
There's a lot of educational trauma, especially in the Central Valley with,
Now, when we say program embedded, I think that's one that we might want to, yeah, embedded, formative, embedded in program. What else did we say that was really important?
Assess teaching, not writing.
Yes, yes,
So.
yeah, but I would say that is very true.
And that goes to the valid point.
Mhm.
Yeah,
The
Ours
balance,
goes
they're
up.
gonna have fun.
yeah,
Good for them.
yeah, we could have just used everybody else's prompts for our definition. And then you have these bullets for the
like a
wide
process
range.
in which, what is reasonable, a process in which, right, we're talking about process. Formative data.
Supported by,
I'm feeling the heat.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking through on our 3A handout, page 2, halfway down, group 4 notes. I think this is what we were kind of getting at the beginning of our conversation. I'm wondering if it should be represented here, where candidates are not at a disservice if they don't have a certain type of classroom or certain type of assignment.
That's the red one.
And you know, the part where it says might be localized and based on best practices. Yeah, and not disservice. I like that last sentence, Rebecca. Yeah, I almost like both of those.
That was our group.
Well, that was us?
Yeah.
Oh, let's go.
No wonder she
What
likes
is
it.
it?
Yeah. She's liking herself. Move it up. I'm just kidding.
which one?
Might be localized and based on best practices. That was one, and then, let me know when you're ready. The other one is the one that,
Localized.
and based on best practices. I do think that's an important part of reasonableness,
I
actually.
think so, yeah,
You're right.
yeah.
And I
You're
like
right.
what Rebecca, thanks for finding that other one. The one is, candidates are not at a disservice if they do not have a certain type of classroom or a certain type of assignment / student. I think that is very important.
Does service have 2 S's?
Yes,
On this paper it does.
yeah.
Great. Oh, but that was written by group 4?
Mhm.
Okay,
No, I'm sure Abraham's spell check.
okay.
I checked
Not
them.
at a disservice.
If they do not have a certain type of classroom or a certain type of assignment / student. Look at this go.
Mhm.
And I think this is perfect.
And we're saying that they should not be penalized because of that.
Exactly.
Okay,
They should not be at a
I'm gonna say
disservice.
I'm gonna disagree with that, but that's my own personal.
Oh, you think that that should count against them?
Not against them necessarily. I just think that teachers, like if you're getting a California teaching credential, you need basic like skills. That's what
But I
basically
also
the
go back
course.
to beginning teachers, that
Right.
you may not have an opportunity yet, not that you won't get it, but it's not there yet. Why should you be penalized for
Right.
having a classroom that you didn't choose?
This
You
is
were
especially important for our rural
Exactly.
candidates. who
thinking
just don't
rural.
have access,
And,
right?
and it wouldn't be reasonable. We're not saying that, candidates don't need to be trained in a wide range.
Yes.
What we're saying is that there is an extremely wide range, and if someone does not have a certain type of student that is being called out, and this is gonna go to the whole ballot thing, and when they dig into the weeds on that they should not be penalized because they didn't have access
It's
to
just
that.
not.
Yeah, exactly. And this is beginning, like you were saying before, in terms of you may not have exposure to,
Supportive.
you know, certain types of students yet, or certain types of contexts. As a beginning,
Yeah, we gotta,
It's all.
we gotta go.
right, right, is that, would you think that's fair?
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that's one thing I go back to, like, it is beginning teachers, it's teachers, and we pop, so I think our whole
all the
hat is just
different
different because we've been there. So.
Right, and at some point, are we going to, as a group, delve into the assessments themselves because I said I took it recently, but
Did you ask for it?
I did. Well, yes, I did.
Share this real quick.
I did. It was just kind of funny.
I have this hearing.
Right, well, that's what I said, everyone was like, Linda, you passed national board, why are you snapping up with this assessment? I'm like, you don't understand, it's really.
Areas
That's the problem with
and
the assessment, and that's where we're at.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying, I think,
Setting.
I think everyone needs to really look at the assessment themselves and delve into it, because you'll see what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
That like, it's
Or do we
really,
want to take out?
like, I'm just, looking at it like,
Interesting.
I can pass the national board.